With the log cabin as the central hub of activity for the marginal figures of the Los Angeles freak scene, Zappa didn't so much have to search for the right artists to document on his label, but instead simply wait for them to turn up. With Wildman Fisher already on the books, the next act to fascinate him was a group of dancers, already established on the downtown scene, who would, over time, become the GTOs.
I was a dancer with a troupe of girls, and we were calling ourselves the Laurel Canyon Ballet Company. And we were dancing with a lot of bands like Love and the Grassroots, Leaves, a lot of local LA bands. Actually, we wound up dancing with Three Dog Night too, and a lot of people. And we wore skimpy little clothes, we were young, pretty teenagers, and everybody wanted us around. So we met, a lot of us met on the Strip, just wandering around. And a whole bunch of us met at Vito's house. Vito was a wild, crazy artist/dancer. He had previously been a beatnik, and he followed whatever scene could get him to the young chicks. And that's how I met a lot of the girls, who later became the GTOs, Miss Lucy and Miss Christine. And Miss Christine was Moon Zappa's governess. She was 6 months old. So I was already a huge fan of Frank's. To me, he represented all that was wild and crazy. I didn't want to be a hippie. I didn't want to be a flower child. I fit right in with the freaks because I wanted to blow minds in whatever way I possibly could. So Miss Christine took us up to meet Frank, and I was just beside myself. Sparky and I, and Miss Lucy already knew him from New York. So we all were hanging out up there, and he was getting such a kick out of us. We were dancing for him and twirling around and just being very excessively who we were. And he just enjoyed it, you know. And he invited us to dance with the mothers.
With each member of the troupe taking the title Miss before their name, an idea that was inspired by the novelty performer Tiny Tim, the Laurel Canyon Ballet Company already had a distinctive group identity when they first began dancing with the mothers in 1968. Yet Zappa saw in them greater potential and proposed that they transform into a band, and they became known as Girls Together Outrageously, or more popularly as the acronym, the GTOs.
I remember it happening one day at Frank's house. You know, he said, you guys should be a group. Because, you know, he had just started his own label, and it had never entered my mind, any of our minds, to be a group. It was completely Frank's idea to turn this group of girls into the GTOs.
Well, they were interested in the music business anyway, so I said, why don't you sing? And I encouraged them to form a semi-singing performing group that would allow them a vehicle through which to express the things that they were doing ordinarily on the street. They were together as a group of people who just hung around together and had their own ingrown folklore and philosophy and theology, and they were just seemed sort of a one-mind type operation. And I thought it would be nice to give people in the outside world, that is, outside the boundaries of Laurel Canyon, some idea of what was going on with these girls and show the way that they were thinking.
So Frank said, you know, you guys should start writing songs. I'm going to go away on the road, and we're going to record you when we get home. So right around that same time, Mercy walked through the door. She'd just come down from San Francisco, and she was really outrageous looking, way more than we were. We were more ethereal, but Mercy looked like a gypsy with big raccoon eyes and just wild. And he pointed at her and said, she's also in the band. And we went, oh my, we were kind of horrified at first, but she and I became very, very close. And around that same time, Cynderella, I guess Mercy brought Cynderella over to the house, over to the cabin. So now there were 7 of us, and Frank said, do these songs, write 14 songs, and we'll record them when the mothers get back from the road. So we went on this mission down in that crazy basement where the bowling alley was, and we wrote these songs.
The intentions of the GTOs were basically to be a girls group without real vocal training, and to also get some of the cutest guys possible. That's my opinion of what it was. It was also a girl thing. One of the first, you know, before the Spice Girls or any of that, it was a girl thing.
And these girls weren't simply drawn to each other through their dancing. Various members of the GTOs had first encountered each other on the Sunset Strip as part of the flourishing groupie scene. And although women seeking sexual intimacy with the famous and the powerful was not a new phenomenon, since the British invasion exploded on American shores in the mid-60s, a subculture had quickly begun to develop. This had gone on undiscussed by the music press and by the musicians themselves, and central to Zappa's interest in documenting the GTOs was to make this scene public.
The whole thing about sex and rock and roll is going through a tremendous change in the 60s. I mean, you begin with bands like the Beatles, who obviously had tremendous sex appeal. You know, there was never a dry seat left in the house and all that kind of stuff. But their public image was squeaky clean, and they were promoted as such. It's only years later you start to get reports of, particularly of their behaviour in places like Australia, where that just women were being just like reeled in, sort of one every 10 minutes or something. As the 60s sort of moved on, I mean, obviously rock and roll basically moved from being variety and entertainment and emerged as an art form of its own. And as it did that, it became self-referential, as art forms inevitably do. So part of the reference, of course, if you're writing about being in a rock and roll band, is not only being on the road, but it's also about groupies. Zappa was particularly keen on bringing it out into the open because for him this was part of the rock and roll message, was free love and sex and threesomes and foursomes and everything else, as a political statement rather than just to get laid. Although, of course, the idea of getting laid was also something he was very keen on. And in fact, he often had groupies living in the house. I mean, Gail just put up with it, although she started off as a groupie herself, so she said. The GTOs was, I suppose, the ultimate expression of this, in that he finally got an actual band of groupies and made them into the act itself.
There was quite a scene. It was a massive scene, and everybody sort of loved each other. We gravitated to each other. It was just a natural thing. You meet them on the strip, walking around. They dressed, they looked similar. You would just want to hug them. It was a very special time. And we were a group of groupies. Not all of them were groupies, though. Just about half of us. Mercy and I, and Christine, even though she pretended she wasn't, she only went out with rock guys. She was the frigid member of the group. She said she'd lay stiff like this while they made love to her. But Sparky was not a groupie, and Sandra was not a groupie. Cynderella was. And Miss Lucy sort of on the fence. So it was about half and half groupies, half. We're called a groupie group, but all of us weren't.